Good morning, everyone. How y'all doing? Last session, pumped, right, to go home. So thanks all for coming. It's a big room. I expected less of a turnout on this last session, but here we go. So I want to thank the Penn State University for putting this on. Great conference. I think I learned a lot. I'm sure you guys all learned a lot too. So hopefully we can close it out with some more things to learn. So my name is Pepijn Bruienne. I work for the University of Michigan. There I am a Mac operations lead. I'll go into exactly what team I'm on in my next slide. Today, the idea is to talk a little bit about how we can get rid of OStent server for good. I used managing here. It's a little broader than that. It's managing, serving, offering services to OStent in general. So I'm going to go over a couple of those things, and then we'll do questions, and we'll get going. So this is me. The team I'm on is called My Workspace. I didn't come up with the name. It is part of a larger University of Michigan program called Next Gen Michigan to kind of reorganize our IT. So there's a lot of units and schools that all do their own IT thing. A lot of wasted resources, as you can imagine. So the idea is to centralize that and have one set of services for various things. As is outlined here by the mission statement a little bit. So we have basically desktop, printing, network, storage, security, and software. The team that I'm on, My Workspace, Mac Engineering, basically is in charge of all the Mac desktop management, which goes to well, pretty much anything we've talked about here at this conference, policies, software deployment, et cetera, et cetera. If you want to know even more about it, there's 2 links here. You can read about it. Lots of things have been written about it. So a little bit about our environment. We use Monkey as our backend. A few years ago, a then central IT employee that I work with wrote a management system around it using Rails, Ruby. We call it ISI. It kind of goes back to the unit it was created with ISS, so ISI kind of was born from that. It is pretty similar to how Wiki Server works, if you've seen that, or other management tools that basically let you manage a lot of nodes and apply software, et cetera, to it. So my job on the operations side is to build out our operations, because we are now going university-wide. So one by one, we are bringing on units, academic units, as well as administrative units to basically buy into our services. So they buy in for a certain cost per employee, and they get all the services that go with that. We manage all their software, and they basically have to do nothing in a perfect world. Some of the tools that I've created in that time, I've been there, well, give or take 2 days. I've been there about a year now. There were 2 tools that I created for. One is for a broader use, and I will go into it a little bit, BSDpy, and ISI Release, which is a tool that I kind of created out of necessity to tie together a bunch of services that are used across the board to release software and track it. These 2 will be part of examples to kind of give you an idea of how you can get your Mac management to make use of tools that are out there, but you might not have found a good way to implement. BSDpy, to clarify, is a NetBoot service that I wrote to replace Apple's service, so that we can basically get rid of the OStent requirement. It's written in Python, as the name might suggest. I will go into it more depth a little later. And this is where I might be found, Twitter, GitHub, Bitbucket. I have various pieces of code on GitHub. Bitbucket I'm on because we get unlimited free private repos as an EDU if you don't use that yet. It's a great perk for using Bitbucket. I believe GitHub does it too, but started Bitbucket first with that. And as mentioned previous sessions as well, Freenode, IRC, # OSX-server. I'm usually there too, and if you want to find me, that's where I will be. So I have to do this one. If you're new, this is how to pronounce my name in case you didn't know. So this is from last year, but just so you know, I could not find an image for the first, so it's just Paul. There you got Pepijn, Bruienne. So there you go. Now you know. Commit it to memory. If you ever need to find me, you know how to pronounce my name. So before we get started, of course, why would you even do such a crazy thing like messing with OStent server? It is great. Sorry, my title refers to the Mad Max movies. If you're under 30, you probably have no idea what I'm talking about. Anyway. Here's the fine fella part of it, and this is my best attempt at Australian. So anyway, there are no Australians, and I don't mean Graham here. So this is the question, why would you get rid of that to begin with? Well, we'll go over this a little bit. So why, we'll answer some questions. So why would we use OStent to host these services? Why not? And what services, if I'm going to ditch or think about ditching OStent, what services can I offer, and what can I use for those? And if you are not quite sure what all that means, I have some examples to kind of give you some various examples of how you can replace some of these services. And hopefully some questions and some answers. Just to kind of establish an audience, if you are a Mac admin and you're looking to get away from OS X because there are no real servers sold by Apple, a Mac Mini is fine, but you pretty much theoretically have to buy 2 to have any kind of redundancy. So any Mac OS X server at this point that you can buy is 2 minis. And since Apple did away with the IP failover functionality in OS X server, that doesn't help you much either. You have to come up with your own tools. You might be a non-Mac admin and you have been tasked with getting all these shiny new aluminum boxes into your existing system that has no Macs at all, and you need to figure out what to do. Or you're just here, you want to learn some more about some of the things that are going on in OS X management and services to maybe one by one move some things around. Or you might just have fallen asleep here because this is the last session, you just woke up. Stick around, it'll get better. So let's go down the list a little bit of why would I want to use OS X. Well, obviously at this point it's cheap. It's a simple Mac App Store install. It has lots of wizards and guided setup and maintenance, so it will prompt you when you need to fix something in the server admin. So there's a lot of hand-holding going there. Obviously, Apple supports it. They will train you on it. So there's a lot of Apple supplied support with that, and it just works mostly. I think we all have our examples of when services were supposed to work, but they don't. So let's look at some of the good sides that I've mentioned. So this is your walkthroughs. You install this, you get lots and lots of these kinds of dialogues, and you get a perfectly configured server that is ready to rock. So this was kind of validated by an earlier Apple session earlier this week where the Apple engineer who was speaking basically said that the 2 things you want to be using OStent server for are the caching server and profile manager, and I'm being very generous with including profile manager. You can do that in other ways, as we know. So I'm going with best case scenario here. So obviously caching server, we all know, is a great Apple add-on to server. As we've seen before, you can virtualize a OStent server to do this if you want to make a little better use of your existing virtual infrastructure. Profile manager, it will help you apply settings through profiles, and it lets you manage them in theory. So I have this quote from just days ago. I thought I'd included it. So, and then of course there's the bad. We've got Profile Manager that temporarily lost its mind, and I'm being very dramatic here, or this might happen to your server. Never a good thing. I'm not saying that other servers won't do that, but the kernel panic is always a showstopper. So why would you not want to use OStent? So some of the shortcomings of OStent, obviously you're locked into hardware and OS choices. The OS choice is what ships. The hardware is what ships. So there's no more Xserve. Other options are not the greatest for server inclusion in a data center. Virtualization options, it's a fairly short list, I'd say. Both are machines that are not really sold anymore. The Xserve is not sold. The Mac Pro 5s, I guess you can still buy them, but it's no longer current hardware. So that list is pretty small if you want to do any kind of virtualization. Then the roadmap, that doesn't exist for the OS. The roadmap is, it's out, go look what's in it. You can kind of, sort of, you know, be a little ahead of the fold by, as mentioned in other sessions, signing up for a developer account and kind of being a little ahead of the game when you start to deploy. Beyond that, as we know, Apple will not comment on any future OS releases, even if you have an enterprise support contract. You hear that a lot when you want to know if a certain bug will get fixed. We'll let you know. Don't call us. And if you want to do various kinds of integration with third-party tools that are covered by server, it's tricky. Just use Apple, and you won't have any trouble. Is basically the idea there. So then we go to, if you stop using OStent, what are some of the benefits? So obviously you can choose from a wide range of hardware and OSs to run this server vendors, OS vendors, whether you like any kind of Linux based OS or BSD or, God forbid, Windows. Then obviously you have many virtualization options. I just took a few screenshots of all the various pieces of hardware that VMware lists that they support, so it's a long list. A lot of these OSs, these enterprise OSs, obviously have roadmaps. I think for a lot of them, that is almost a selling point that they have a roadmap. That Ubuntu has a roadmap, I believe, well into 2018. They have the long-term support. They have the steady updated OSs. So that is a lot easier to plan, both from an upgrade standpoint as well as a budgeting standpoint. You need to tell your superiors what in 5 years are we going to have to pay for as far as our OS choices for our servers. And interoperability, obviously, there's a lot of choices of systems that you can tie together in all sorts of new and exciting ways that we'll touch on a little later. So let's see here. So these are some missing features that you may want to address. So you don't want to rely on Mac Minis as a server platform. You are bound by a specific OS or hardware choice, so you are not able to pick OStent or capable servers. This is if you are a Windows admin and you need to integrate Macs into your environment. You are by policy or by lack of knowledge not able to integrate any kind of OStent server in your environment. OStent obviously does not come out of the box with a whole lot of options as far as software package management, software deployment. That's pretty much a third-party choice already, but since it's not in there, the option to choose something else becomes easier to make. Any kind of reporting, the reporting that's in OStent is OStent server is mostly of the OS itself. There's not a whole lot of client reporting going on. And any kind of integration with third-party tools is not as easy. Or you just like any of these better. You like Linux or Windows or BSD just a lot better and you're more comfortable with it. That is a very valid reason as well. So I made a graph, or a table rather. So this is by no means an all-inclusive list because it doesn't fit on the slide. I'm going to go over a couple of highlights that probably most of you have at least heard of, and then we'll pick some of those to go into some more in depth. So update management, I'm basically tagging that for any kind of software updates, whether they are new installs or updates you need to do on a recurring basis. So I think I have a nice point here. There you go. So obviously we got the Monkey Web Admin combo here. Wiki Server as a more a multi-site, multi-departmental solution. Mandrill as a web-based a repo management tool as well, and Reposado Margarita as a combination to run your own Apple software update server. All of these are non-OStent reliant, with the caveat that I believe Mandrill has some OStent reliance on some of the underlying Monkey tools, but I don't know if Joe's here. He's not here. Anyway, he would know better. Joe Wallard, who wrote it. Then we'll go to configuration and reporting. I'm kind of putting some things together here. So Puppet has obviously strong configuration management capabilities, as well as reporting on clients. Monkey Reports, PHP, SAL. I'm putting Crypt in here as well because it is a very useful tool to do your file vault storage, and kind of put it in this mix. Again, all of those not not OStent reliant. Some of the integration tools that sort of let you tie these processes together. AutoDMG is obviously OStent reliant, but I'm mentioning it here because it sort of it does help glue things together, and it's not really an OStent server product. It's more something an admin would run on their own system. AutoPKG, to a certain extent, can run outside of OStent server. You could split them up and have the package building part on an OStent machine. Tool here that I'll touch on a little later, the NetBoot replacement. JSS importer, sort of as an integration tool between packages, auto package, and Casper. Also glues things together. This guy over here sort of tries to patch you, tries to provide some of the Monkey services to to Casper, things that are missing in Casper. These are some of the pieces of glue that go together. These are all open source tools. Then we'll go in some of the commercials here. So familiar names here: Absolute Management, Jamf, Casper, FileWave, Microsoft, SCCM, Dell also has a product still case. Then on the commercial side, we have some similar tools. Obviously, Puppet has their enterprise product. Ansible, Python-based configuration management, has a commercial option. Splunk, you may have heard of. It may be in use in your environment as the sort of the 500-pound gorilla of monitoring and reporting. I'll show some examples of how you can implement that in an OStent environment to get some reporting on your clients. Some of the other commercial tools for some of the integration pieces. Centrify Direct Control, if you need to integrate into an Active Directory environment, will help you do that very easily. You don't have to make any schema extensions in your AD, which makes it sort of a light touch implementation versus having to make schema changes. ExtremeIP, these days made by Acronis, provides a full service AFP server on Windows. We'll go into some of the things you can do with that as well. Jamf also has, it's free, but I'm just filing it under Jamf because they do offer it as sort of a companion to their commercial product. NetSUS, which provides net booting and software update services. We're going to kind of pick a few from this list to look at a little more in depth. So, what services can I offer without OStent server? So the first, I'm going to kind of go down the list of OStent services that are in there, and we'll kind of look at some alternatives. So first, file sharing server. At this point, OStent is moving away from AFP, Apple File Sharing, to make SMB the default file sharing protocol. That has its pros, it has its cons. I think we probably all have run into the cons of using SMB. There are still a lot of bugs to work out with SMB. So some of the replacements that you can work with for AFP is NetAtalk, which is a pretty established Unix-based AFP. It refers to AppleTalk still. That's how old it is. That you can implement to basically offer AFP services from a non-OStent environment. And a commercial side, ExtremeIP does the same thing. Now, if you do need to offer SMB services because you have Windows clients or otherwise need that capability, Samba, which Apple used up until pretty recently, obviously is a pretty well-known choice. And of course, Windows Server at any point has a fine, I'll call it fine file server as well. NFS, OStent pretty much uses NFSD as well. So that's a one-to-one switch you can make. And there's commercial NFS servers too, so Allegro is one of them that is available out there. For DHCP, DNS, pretty well-known names, I would say. Again, Apple uses these tools as well for DHCP and Bind. It's the ISC Internet Services Consortium. Forget their name, Security Consortium. So these are all open source tools. And then for commercial implementations, Windows Server obviously offers these services. There are dedicated tools like Infoblocks that let you do large-scale DHCP and DNS management as well. For websites, I think it's a pretty much a no-brainer. I think at this point we all kind of know that OStent is not exactly the first choice when it comes to serving web pages, unless you have to for some reason. But Apache, Nginx, Light HTTPD, open source, and then IIS, Netscape has a server still. Oracle has WebSphere HTTP server. I had to dig a little bit because it's these days IIS and Oracle do take up quite a chunk of that. So the next we got directory services. I think we're all pretty familiar with what else is out there. OpenLDAP, which Apple bases Open Directory on, is a standalone product that you can run on Unix-based services. Apache has a directory service server tool, and 389 Directory Server is a recent split off of, I forget now, but anyway, it's that's what it is, right? Red Hat open source that, so definitely worth looking at. And then we got the well-knowns, of course, Active Directory, eDirectory, yeah. And Oracle Internet Directory are some of the other ones. I think Active Directory is probably the 95% of what you will find out there as far as Windows-based directory services. NetInstall server, mentioned before, tool I'll go into a little bit. NetSUS provides the ability to netboot as well. And with some hackery, ISCs, DHCPD can also be made to serve netboot with a number of restrictions that I'll touch on once I go into DSDpy. Time machine backup, useful feature if your network is strong enough to take 100 clients all doing time machine backups over the network. FreeNAS/TrueNAS, they offer a commercial and an open source solution. FreeNAS is very easy to set up. You can basically, it's a checkbox to support time machine on Mac compatible shares, and Acronis ExtremeIP also supports, again, checkbox time machine backup destinations on its shares. We're almost there, I promise. Then we got the Wiki Server. Some people might use this. Does anyone use the Wiki Server and OStent server right now? You do, a few people. Again, I think the alternative choices are pretty well known: MediaWiki, Drupal, Tiki, and then to call SharePoint a Wiki server is both doing it a favor and not. But we'll say that SharePoint can host wikis if your environment is SharePoint centric. Confluence, Jive, Social Text, those are some of the commercial offerings there. Xcode Server. Some of the features Xcode Server offers are just straight version control. Others are a little more Xcode specific that you may not be able to replicate, but what it does can be easily replicated with distributed builds with other tools as well. So I definitely wanted to point it out. So GitHub has a, obviously Bitbucket, GitLab, Gitorious, all have hosted or self-hosted solutions for that, for version control servers. Microsoft has their team, I always forget what that stands for. Team, anyway, TFS, it's a team version control server as well. And you got Beanstalk, Stash, those are all, I believe Microsoft supports Git as well. Those are some commercial solutions to kind of replace the Xcode server. Mail, calendar, contact server, I think we all kind of know what's out there as far as alternatives. Apple uses Dovecot themselves right now. They moved away from Postfix. So these are some of the open source. I put Zimbra in here. I used it a number of years ago. Do they still have an open source solution? I believe so, right? Yeah, I think so. And then you got Exchange, Gmail, Carrier, Lotus Domino. If you use Lotus Domino, I feel sorry for you, but you may be tied into it. So if you have it, I didn't have to point out that you can use it for email, but there you go. VPN server, a number of solutions there as well. OpenVPN, Soft Ether VPN, a pretty new entry that is, I believe, Finnish. And then OpenSSH also offers a number of VPN capabilities. Microsoft obviously has their services that they offer, SSTP, PPTP, Cisco AnyConnect, a number of the SSL VPN appliances that are out there, pretty popular, I think, to consider if you want to move away from that. Finally, messages server, Jabber, OpenFire, some of the open source replacements for that, and then Oracle has an IAM server. Link and Trillion also has a commercial product that supports Jabber in a commercial support capability. All right, so let's look at some examples. Those were a lot of words and a lot of things. So I'm not going to give you an example of each of the ones that I touched, and I'm going to give you some practical examples, some things that I had to figure out myself, some that might help you in doing some first line, sort of moving away from some services. So we'll go over some generating reports. I think everyone knows that their managers love reports. The more pictures and colors, the better, because they're important. Providing netboot services, I think that's one of the holdouts maybe for people to get away from OStent because it does it well and you need to keep that around. File sharing alternatives, I think, like I said, we all kind of know what's out there, but I want to point out a few things that might help you move away from things a little quicker than having to do a major infrastructure overhaul. And service integration into useful workflows. That reads pretty poorly. What I mean by that is, I couldn't word it much better. Having a number of different services in your organization because of practices and policies that need to be followed that can be tied together in a little more workable way so that you don't have to do 1,000 manual steps to go through to run the gauntlet and get your, in this case, monkey updates from testing into production to release. So let's start with some reporting. As said, reports are good and charts are good. So with reporting in this case, we mean reporting on clients. So we want to get some data from clients regarding hardware configuration, software, system configuration itself. And then we want to use that data to graph some things like how is a software update that I enabled distributed over time? What versions of software do I have installed? Do I need to worry about any of them? Flash would be a great example today. Hardware information, which machines have less than X amount of RAM or X amount of hard disk space. User activity, user ran so-and-so app, or a number of things that you might want to track to because you have certain compliance policies. Both open source and commercial solutions are available. Open source, we've got SAL, pretty popular solution, Monkey Report PHP. And on the commercial side, we have Splunk. Jamf Casper also has a number of reporting options as well. Look at SAL first. This is where you may get that. There have been previous talks about SAL, or integrating SAL this conference. So very short, Python Django-based dashboard for Monkey, a reporting dashboard. Clients report back with a number of pieces of data that are then laid out in a nice, accessible dashboard. Uses Monkey, uses Factor. You can use Factor to extend it and get more info as well. So runs on Linux or OStent server, and in the interest of getting a better handle on Docker, which I will go into a little more later, I have created a Docker image of SAL to give people an easier start with SAL. A lot of these tools, the wiki to get started is fairly involved. You have to install this and make sure you have Python set up and these dependencies. I figured it might be easier for people to get started and get an idea of this to roll it into a Docker image, which is a contained image of everything that you need to run this. And once it's up, you can hit the SAL server and you're good to go. So in the interest of getting a quick start with it and seeing if it would do something for your environment, that's a great way to get started. And you had another deployment solution, right? What were you using?
Heroku.
Oh, Heroku as well. So look at Graham's slides as well from his previous talk using Heroku. This is a pretty easy install because it just lets you download the SAL image, set up Docker, and get going. Has a plugin framework as well. One of the plugins that was written by Nick McSpadden is a import plugin that imports into Web Help Desk some data. So people are actively developing some of these, some of the plugins. So you can take a look at that as well. So this is what SAL looks like. I just have one screenshot. I'm not going to do live demos. But this is kind of gives you an idea. So it's a modern looking reporting dashboard with lots of info to click on, and I think it gives you a great overview of your environment as far as Mac hardware and updates go. Again, runs on any kind of Unix-based OS, and if you're using Docker, pretty much if Docker runs it, you can run it on it. Next one I have is Monkey Report PHP, very similar to SAL, I would say, as far as capabilities. It's built with PHP, not Python. Client-server setup. The client, during the Monkey run, sends data to the server, which then graphs it. Again, you can run it on Linux or OS X. And this is what it looks like. So very similar graphs, dashboard looking. I believe that actually uses a very similar bootstrap-like UI. Some of the commercial solutions here. So Jamf does a number of reporting options as well, inventory reporting. Uses smart groups to collect the data you're looking for, license use, warranty information, link to the product page. And this is what it looks like. So if you're a Jamf user, this will look pretty familiar to you. Then we've got Splunk. Splunk is a really big reporting tool. It can do lots and lots of reporting. So using it for OS X clients may seem sort of a drop in the bucket, but if you have it installed in your environment, it may be a great tool to get some of that reporting data that you currently don't have into your sort of on your radar. As I said, it's a big enterprise tool, and it can be extendable using Splunk apps. There is a Splunk app for Unix and Linux, which basically it runs on OS X. It has an OS X capable version, and you can extend it or write scripting for it to pull the information that you need, submit it to Splunk, and then use Splunk to graph it. Again, this is a heavyweight reporting tool, so you need to do a little more work on the server side to display the data as you want it. But once you got the data in there, you can do lots of cool stuff with that. It's the link to the Splunk app. And there's also a universal forwarder, which lets you forward system logs to Splunk. So if you would want to forward your monkey logs or anything like that into Splunk, you can use that as well to then graph it in a meaningful way. Create a short link to that as well. And this is what one implementation of that might look like. Again, it is very customizable, so you can make it look pretty much however you want. And it's pretty similar looking to Puppet Dashboard in a way as well. It has kind of that feel to it. Okay, did I go too fast? Ask me questions about it if you have questions. Next one I want to look at is NetInstall, NetBoot. So the previous solutions that are out there that attempt to implement NetBoot on a non-OStent host use ISC's dhcpd, which basically involves creating a custom dhcp reply when a Mac client looks for a NetBoot server. There were a number of limitations with that. First of all, you have to manually go into configuration files and set up everything just right, and by just right I mean everything, every single digit or every single bit of data that goes into the reply packet has to be right or it all breaks. It's a pretty daunting thing if you don't know exactly what you're doing. You're just trying to get things going. To have it offer multiple Buddha images, which a lot of us will probably want to do, gets even tougher. You have to do a lot of conditional. Basically, dhcpd is not made to be that flexible, and it gets kind of hairy to do that. And it does not support using startup disk to pick a NetBoot image because startup disk uses random UDP ports instead of the standard 67, 68. It picks a random port to get its reply on, and that is not possible with dhcpd, so that's out entirely. As one of the few services that still required OStent, in our shop at least, I made it sort of the itch to scratch using tools that I was trying to learn. So in this case, I decided to use Python because it seems to be sort of the popular thing to do these days, and it's readable, and it kind of gave me a project to attack learning this with an actual goal. So BSDpy is basically a NetBoot NetInstall implementation in Python. My goal is to have it be a full feature replacement for NetInstall NetBoot. To that end, right now it supports multiple boot images, which involves putting multiple NBI files in a directory, and it picks them up and serves them out. It supports model hardware filtering, so if your NetBoot image was set up with SIU, System Image Utility, and you have certain limitations that you want to enforce, maybe you want your older machines who can only boot 10.7 to just boot 10.7, newer ones only to boot 10.9, et cetera, it supports that. So it will read those settings and filter out hardware that is not supported. It works with the startup disk preference pane. So when you need someone to use the startup disk, whether it's in the recovery partition or in the OS itself, all the volumes will show up in startup disk, something previously not possible. Runs on most Linux distributions that have Python 2.7 installed. I have a Docker image for it as well that will greatly help in getting up and running. I will go into how to get that running, but basically it sets up a running NetBoot service that you can then test on, let's say, a VM and with some local machines, or even a local, if you use it on VMware, you can have a Linux VM that runs this and a Mac VM and have it NetBoot off that to kind of verify that things work as you expect. To get it, you can go to my Bitbucket page right there. All these slides will be available, so if you need to get that, they will be available. And the Docker image can be gotten at the Docker hub, as it's called now. And I'll go in a little bit into getting this set up from start to finish with the OStent if you're running an OStent host. So on OS X, you need something called boot to Docker, which is a very tiny VM that runs Linux because Docker right now is not supported in OS X. To set it up is real easy. It has an install package. Just run the package. It will set it up for you, and you are good to go. Starting it is, if you were at the Vagrant talk yesterday, who was at the Vagrant talk? No one? Oh, a couple people. It's very similar to that. So you initialize it, and you start it, and it runs in the background. It uses VBox by default, which is also installed by the package. And getting your NetBoot server up and running is as simple as, and I use simple very liberally, Docker. I know this is a little new, but hang in with me. So Docker run as a daemon. We need some ports that we need to open. So 67 is for the NetBoot client, 69 is for the TFTP client. We're going to use HTTP for the NetBoot image. We are going to share a path on our OS X server where we currently have our NetBoot images stored, and we're going to mount that inside the container as at the root at NBI. Give it a name, and this is the sorry, it's not here, but this is how it's registered with the Docker hub. So if you type this in and you don't have it installed, it will download it, then start it. And then if you want to install this on Linux, you do not need the boot to Docker step. You can install Docker by grabbing the latest binary, untarring it, setting it executable. These are all steps that are on the Docker site, and moving it to where you need to have it. At that point, the Docker daemon, okay, at once. Start the Docker daemon. If you are on a Linux that has apt or yum, they have Docker as well in their repository, so you can use those to install it as well. And then the same steps apply. So we're going to run it. We're going to open some ports. On Linux, you might not have this exact path, so you might want to supply a different path to one or more NBI files, I should say. Give it a name. Tell it which image to run, and it will be up and running. And at that point, you will be able to see it do stuff, because that is always good if you can see it do stuff. Docker has a command called logs that basically works as tail. If you supply it the F, it will follow it. And if you give it that command, this would be an example of what the output would be. Can everyone see this? Because I pasted it from terminal. I'm realizing that this might not be the easiest to read, so I'll go over it. So it's telling us that it's using HTTP to share out our images. This is our IP, our host name here, and then we're going to start a session. And over here, it reads my folder. It's looking for images. So in this case, I have one here, and I actually have two here. And then it says I'm using this image and this image. So there's a 10.9 and a 10.8 image, and it's now good to go. So a client starts up and asks for an image, and it shows you it got a request, and it determines the list of images that are applicable to this particular client. It found an enabled system, and it found a disabled system. So in these two images, I disabled the iMac, what does it say, 13,2. I just enabled it in this one, disabled it in this one, so it will only be offered the 10.9.3 image, and it also found a default image as well. And it shares that to the client. The client then gets the NetBoot image, picks it, and starts booting. The only thing that needs to be added to this mix here is if you want to use NFS instead of HTTP, you can either set up your own NFS server that shares out these boot images, or as an additional setup, and actually I will be publishing that shortly, is to set up a separate NFS container that connects to this one, so that NFS can be used instead of HTTP, depending on what your environment requires. And that allows you to serve netboot to Mac clients out of Linux or any kind of Unix-based OS. You are not required to use the Docker solution. You can download the source code and run it on a system directly. There's nothing from stopping you. This sort of takes the startup, makes the startup a little quicker. So I'm going to go a little bit into the things that yes?
Apologies if you're going to cover this in a minute, but are there any, how do you integrate this into an existing dhcp environment?
Well, dhcp doesn't really care about the netboot queries. They are different. When a Mac goes on the network and it says, "Hey, who has netboot images for me?" it sends out a specific dhcp option and option list that is outside of, "Hey, give me an IP." That the one that it sends out is in, "I'm a Mac and I want to know about a netboot server." So regular dhcp servers will ignore that entirely. It will see them, it will ignore it. This actually sees the request and replies to it and says, I'm a netboot server and this is what I have for you. So it's the same way Apple's works as well.
Is there any way, and again, stop me if this is way too off the side, in any way, if you have an existing DHCP infrastructure, all your forwarders get to one machine, all right, so I understand what you're saying, it sees this option, it's like, I don't know how to service that option. I don't know what kind of reply it might send or if it just drops it entirely. Is there any way to get a reference from that DHCP that's like, oh, what you actually need is this boot server over here?
Well, I mean, it depends on the DHCP server. Some are able then to relay to relay requests to a different one, but I think relaying is a little bit of all or nothing. So if you relay, it all goes to another one. So you would either have to have your IP helpers, added to have, and you're talking, just to be clear, you're talking for cross subnet booting, right? Because in the same subnet, it will work.
Yeah, that's the environment that I'm working in. The question, I mean, is the typical setup, all right, you've got ISC over here doing all your normal booting, it doesn't involve net booting at all, just DHCP perhaps.
Yeah.
And then you have one sitting on the same wire, waiting for net boot requests, and when it sees one, it goes, oh.
I think that probably DHCP-D specifically, you would be able to do that because it's a little smarter in that you can do some logic to route requests. I don't know the exact way to do that. The one thing that I can tell you is that I tested this with Apple's own BootP server, is that you can tell it to relay to certain IPs. So you could use sort of your old netboot server as a relay to this implementation somewhere else. But it depends on the DHCP server you're using, whether it's able to relay certain requests to another server or if it all has to go there.
So is the setup typically most people use your, I'm assuming the IP helper is the switch saying you're relaying, you're having your IP helpers send the request to two different servers?
Yeah. You could, I mean, most switches support multiple IP helpers. It'll just blast it to everything in the list. That's how we do it too. We have two set across our network.
Normal DHCP ISC says, great, I can handle this.
Yeah.
Mac booting DHCPY says, oh,
Yeah.
that's me, I'll take it.
Yeah, and this ignores any other request. So if it's not a specific Apple BootP request, it's not interested, skips it. So it's pretty
Thank you.
pretty quiet that way. So some of the features that I'm working on and that I've had some requests for that I'm planning to integrate is doing some more integration with third-party tools. So it would be great, for example, if your management system, you could pick what netboot image to boot from in your management system versus having to go into a very complicated plist and trying to figure out which machine has what MAC address and trying to apply it that way. So that would be an example of I want this boot image to go to this Mac or group of Macs. My tool would be able to reach out to that third-party tool through an API, say, hey, I'm looking for so-and-so information. Do you have anything on them? And do you have an image I should be using versus the ones that I'm about to send out? Another one would be get some location-based stuff going. So if there's a specific location you're at by subnet or some other way you configured it out, it being Python, you have a number of ways to figure out that kind of information. Supply a different image automatically. So make it more flexible besides just filtering by model ID or MAC address, which is pretty rough. This would make that easier to do. For example, you have an off-campus remote site, or your School of Engineering needs this, and your LSNA needs something else. You would, if you had a way to determine where that machine is, you could feed it a different image without having to have a whole bunch of complicated filtering going on. And something I'm working on right now is to kind of, what you were just talking about, IP helpers, to have a number of these instances on your various subnets, because it's very low maintenance, to have one instance reach out to other subnets that it knows about, to find on those subnets other instances, to kind of like make a grid, so to say, so that you don't need the IP helpers to hop subnets. Still sort of in the figuring out how that would work phase, but I'm looking to use some kind of like a service discovery to possibly make that happen. It's a little further down the list, but I'm definitely looking at that, because I know that some people do not have the capability of getting IP helpers set because the network people are usually unwilling to do that. I think that's a common occurrence. Looking to do some more Docker support, like I was saying, by linking containers that serve HTTP or NFS. You would be a little more flexible in offering images. You could split them off and not have to tie everything into one image for all those services. And doing some syncing as well. So having one instance send images to other nodes that it knows about as well. So you could have one be a master and having your boot images spread around automatically versus having to upload it to each one that you may have in your network. That was awesome NetBoot talk. Is everyone still awake? Okay. I know it's a little dry, but it's a pretty important thing for a lot of organizations to have net booting somehow available in another capacity. File sharing. So I think we all kind of know what we can do with file sharing alternatives. I just want to go over a few things just so we're all on the same page. So AFP is legacy now, so Apple does not consider it their first choice anymore. SMB will be your choice now as a default. They use their own homebrew tool now. I'll call it homebrew because sometimes it works like that. SMBX. Still working on a lot of bugs. I'm hearing that there might be some improvements in a future OS that has not been announced yet, but you never know.
I have a document from Apple about improvements coming in SMB. We put in a bug.
Yeah, we did too. I didn't want to just take an axe to my NDA, but yes, it might very well get better. It might very well get better. We're hoping, because we're looking at kernel panics right now. So I'm listing them here. So the SMB2 implementation that Apple gives you on the client side is not great. The performance isn't great. If you have a couple thousand folders or files in a folder, you will wait till next week for that to list. Switching back to SMB1 is one solution. There's bugs with certain NAS vendors that may or may not include kernel panics. Then, of course, NFS, still popular in large environments. Some universities have a long-standing tradition of NFS, and it's hard to get rid of. That is a very viable option on OStent as well. Mounting NFS shares is pretty simple to do, and the performance on that is usually pretty decent if it's been set up properly. And hands up if you use AFS. Excellent. We do too. So I'm only a little kidding. We still have AFS implemented. It's very rickety, but there's still an open AFS implementation for clients. We tried to get rid of it once, and there was a lot of pushback. We did not expect that. So right now, we support AFS. So there you go. If you don't know what AFS is, go look it up, and you'll see the horror that it is. So that said, a lot of people will still be saying, I want that AFP because it works the best. People are accustomed to it. It will save. It will do various things that SMB may not support. It's quicker in a lot of implementations. So what can I do? Well, I think we have obvious choices. We have NetAtalk, as I mentioned. There's FreeNAS, also supports AFP pretty easily, or TrueNAS, which is their commercially supported product. And then there's Acronis has good old ExtremeIP. So some of the pros and cons of these solutions. NetAtalk is compatible with many Unix-like OSs. You need to do a little more hand tweaking. You need to get into some configs and set things up the way you want it. Compared to that, FreeNAS has a nice web interface. It's easier to get started. They have a VM you can put down and get started with it. The web UI is very pleasant to use. I've never had any problems with it. And it's time machine compatible, as I mentioned earlier. And it uses ZFS, which, if you may or may not know, is a pretty capable and solid file system that uses storage pools and is very disaster recovery friendly. It's very stable, and it's what they base it on. ExtremeIP. Who here uses ExtremeIP? I'm curious. Well, quite a few people, all right. It's a mature and well-established product. It's been around for ages. Group Logic made it before Acronis bought them, and now sells it. It keeps AFP parity with Apple, so if Apple makes changes to it, which they won't because it's legacy, so that's easy, they keep up with it. So anything AFP supports, they will be compatible as well. It supports things like a network Sherlock search, so you can do indexed searching on shares. It supports Time Machine as well. It's compatible with Microsoft DFS, so you can share DFS enabled volumes. And one of the great features that I think it has, because it considerably shortens the time to implement it and get things going and migrating from a SMB-only environment, is the resharing capability. It also offers print support if you need such a thing. I've never really used it for that. So the resharing, it's a great feature, I think, because it allows you to reshare a share somewhere on another existing SMB server without having to do any kind of migration or getting the ExtremeIP software on that exact server that the existing SMB share is on. It uses a service account that has access to that share and then takes all the contents of that existing SMB share, shares them back out over AFP. Retains ownership and permissions, all the things you would come to expect from ExtremeIP. And the VM that you might need for that, or the server, it's pretty low spec because you don't need any storage because you're resharing, and it's mostly just a network I/O. So you want to make sure that you have your server VM in a well-connected environment. But it doesn't do any storage of itself beyond the indexing and other caching that it may do. So you can get up and running with a pretty lean VM without too much trouble. And it also supports, so if you use any kind of like NAS, SAN solution that does not have a server you could install ExtremeIP on, you can still have it connect to shares on that appliance and share that out over AFP if the AFP implementation in your appliance doesn't work well or doesn't offer it. Sometimes the two are the same. And like I said, you don't need to install the software on the actual file server sharing the sorry, I'm going a little fast. On sharing the SMB shares. Has anyone here done the resharing? No? All right. Well, I would say if you own the product, check it out. They have a free trial that you can install and see. I don't work for them, by the way. I just like the feature, so I'm not getting any kickbacks for this. But it's a great way if you have existing SMB shares that you might want to migrate on a little more permanent basis. This helps you to quickly share those and see if it will work for your environment. So that is on file sharing. I got 16 minutes left. All right, we'll get through this. All right, I'm going to give you an example of some integration that I had to do for some services that we use. So, wouldn't it be great if we all use the same couple of tools for everything we do in our work environment? That'd be great, right? And those tools all talk to each other without us having to do a whole lot of stuff 100% of the time. And we never have to manually re-enter any data. You put it in once, or maybe you don't ever put it in manually and it's just available everywhere. That would be great. It'll never happen. And to a large extent, I think that's why we're all here, because we come in where things don't talk to each other very well. And there are some requirements or some questions whether we can make it happen. So we must help the machines. And I'm going to give an example from my organization. For us, software update releases go as follows. We have separate Mac, Windows, and printing teams that all log all releases or any changes they do in SharePoint. I'll say it again, in SharePoint. SharePoint is great for a number of things. I've yet to run into them, but we use, I don't like it. We use a list that basically has a number of bits of information about every piece of software or configuration change we make. It has the name, what's done, whether QA has tested it, whether it failed, passed, has been postponed, a number of those things. We need to keep those logs for compliance sake, so there we are, logging things in SharePoint. Us on the Mac engineering team, we use Trello and Jenkins. Those names may sound or not sound familiar. Jenkins probably more. We use it very similar to what AutoPackage does, so we have Jenkins build our packages, our software that we deploy automatically and put it into testing for us. Trello is a, how should I describe that? It's a,
card-based task manager.
There you go. Excellent. It's a card-based task manager. So it allows teams to share tasks on lists, and they look like cards that you move around, and people can take ownership of them. There's commenting. It's a great tool because what we do, every piece of software that gets built in Jenkins gets a new card in our testing list, and we can see what's lined up for that week. Someone can make a comment and say, this needs so-and-so done before it'll work, or this is good, move it over to the next list. All of that was pretty much manual. So, and then of course our monkey repo is just files and directories. So there's a lot of things here that are sort of living in their own space. You got SharePoint, you got a few web services, and you got files and folders. So a lot of our process was manual. So software drops in, there's a card. Now someone needs to go make an entry in SharePoint and say, this software is now here. QA team, please test it. QA team tests it, says okay. We have a weekly meeting where we go over all the stuff in SharePoint and check it as approved. None of that translates back to here, and it definitely does not translate back to here. So there was a lot of manual labor involved. The reason I wrote something is because the person who usually does it is pretty familiar with the process. I had to take it over for 2 weeks, and I want to blow my brains out. Not because it was poorly written or anything, but just because the process was sort of evolved from doing one thing manually and then another and then another, and sometimes you just have to make something work on the spot. So having no real great experience with doing it, I kind of said, well, I'm not doing this anymore. So let's figure out a way to make that work a little better. And I think that for a lot of solutions that we come up with, that sometimes is a very important driver. I don't want to do this again manually, ever. So I took to trusty old Python and kind of spec'd out what I would need it to do. So first of all, I don't want to be creating any new entries or cards or moving cards. So set up something that syncs Trello and SharePoint through its individual APIs. Great thing about Python is that if you have something like Trello or SharePoint, you go and search for a module for it, and there's at least 3 or 4 that will do exactly what you want. So I picked the ones that seems the most useful for me, plugged them in, and then moved on to getting approved items from SharePoint to physically move the card from testing to approved. That was a manual process, so that was automated. Then on our weekly release night, we release every Thursday night. I made it update the package infos files from testing, to say the testing catalog, to the actual production catalogs that they need to have. And then have it move the packages or disk images on the repo to their appropriate. We use some folders to kind of organize it a little bit. I think we all do that to some extent. So it moves those around, and that was about 6 or 7 steps that were manual that I took out of the picture that we no longer had to do. So I was very happy with that. Now, we have a separate job that does the usual make package info and release it to production at that point. Now, you might say, great, it's automated, but machines do things pretty good, but other things, they may screw it up. So we didn't want to make this a completely automated process from start to finish, because if something goes wrong, you might be in deep trouble. So what we did, we defined 2 manual steps where human eyes will take a look at what's about to happen. So we have the approval step, where we have a weekly meeting where everyone says, okay, turn keys. So there's one step where machine waits for a human, for someone to pull the switch. And then the second one is for the on release day, we have lists. We have one list that is approved. The other one is to release. The to release list is what the tool looks at. If there's anything in there, it will move it. But the step between approved and to release is manual. Just so we have one last time someone look at it, make sure that it looks good. They move them over, and then at a set time, the process will move everything from to release and update and move files around. All this gave us a significant effort reduction. Our release process is now basically babysitting it, making sure that it does what it's supposed to do and everything looks good. And we've done it for about 4 weeks now, and I think the time that was involved in our entire release process has gone from probably about 2 hours a week to maybe 5 minutes or so, something like that. So it's greatly reduced effort. Plus, it's much easier to explain to someone who's new how our release process works. You run this tool, you give it this command, and it will do it for you. You just have to make sure that everything as it's staged looks good by the standards we have. So there's a lot less manual involvement and a lot less opportunity for human error. It's a predictable outcome. We know what it's going to do, instead of, oops, I mistyped something, or I moved it into the wrong folder, or I ran the wrong make catalogs command. And it ties together all these systems. So tied together Jenkins, Trello, SharePoint, and Monkey, as it is a file and folder, a combination of those. And that saved us a lot of time. So that is an example of when you have a number of systems that are entirely not OStent based, but some of them are, like Monkey may be, tying them together and kind of moving out of that I have to use OStent all the time to I can do this without, and I can tie things together. That's kind of my point of this example. I hope it makes sense. I know it's kind of like who what, but I hope it gives you an idea of what's possible given an itch to scratch. This is a good way to go to learn some of this stuff and reduce your workload a little bit. We call it Izzy Release. I have awesome pictures of that too. I hope you can read it, but basically this is our process. So this is Jenkins. My tool here runs, goes into SharePoint, Trello. We have a weekly release meeting. That's a manual change here. Tool takes over again, lines things up manually. We move the things to the right list, and then the tool picks up at a weekly run, drops all the files in the right place, updates catalog entries, and moves things in our Trello board to the release list for that week. That is all it does in one very colorful picture. And hopefully we've learned something, so I'll go over it. Reasons we should keep using OStent for some services. So caching server, I don't know, I put that in there too. It has some, because Apple has a lock on some of these things as well, obviously, but MDM services, third-party MDM services will also let you do that. So caching server being the main reason to keep using it. And then, of course, why we shouldn't use it for a number of things. So services we can provide without third-party can help you with MDM, update management, reporting. And we saw some examples that I hope were helpful. And I have 5 minutes left, so let's do questions. Yes?
Just around, again, about the BSDpy tool. And is this is something you wrote, or is this something I didn't quite catch?
Yeah, I open sourced it, so
okay.
it's freely available. Either the Docker implementation or the regular.
Have you ever come across the need to do like home sync, where it backs up the documents that OS server offers? Have you found any open source solutions to that?
Oh, you mean like portable?
Yeah, like
home directories?
mobile accounts.
Mobile accounts are portable home directories.
Right.
Yeah, because I think you should never use portable home directories because it's a nightmare, even with Apple's tools.
Okay.
That said, I mean, you can do a number of things. You can use something as simple as an rsync setup where you have that triggered. A great tool to look at if you want triggered syncs is lsync. Lsync, which monitors your file system and can then kick off rsync to sync just the things that were changed.
Okay.
It's pretty low impact and it works really well. I think the whole mobile sync thing, the home sync, is really, it has a lot of problems with it, and I think if people have an opportunity not to use it, they move away from it and implement it some other way with regular mobile accounts. So you have your data on your computer, and these days with the Dropboxes and everything else around, I think it becomes a little less of a must-have because people have other ways to keep things in sync. But yeah, I would probably look at something lsync, rsync combination because that only triggers when stuff is changed.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Are you planning to write a caching server replacement?
What's that? Oh, God. Well, I think that'll probably be a little tricky, just as some other of these services that heavily rely on Apple actually letting you do it, because it relies on a lot of inside Apple football that I think someone has to reverse engineer, and by the time they figure it out, Apple will change it all on them. So, yes?
Have you used or had any experience with Zentile or Zential, the server-in-a-box product that is Linux-based?
No. What does it offer? I've not heard of it.
It's basically a drop-in replacement for Exchange. It provides Exchange-like services with Active Sync,
Okay.
file server,
Yeah.
DHCP, DNS, basically the whole lot.
I have not, but it sounds like a great way to get a whole bunch of services right out of OStent server. Basically, if it's not OStent server, it sounds fine to me. Which sounds really weird for a Mac admin, but I'd rather... SharePoint?
Yeah, what if it was based on SharePoint?
I don't know. Set it on fire.
What was the name of that product? Zentile. Z-E-N-T-Y-A-L. Okay.
I'll check that out. I haven't heard of that.
Zentile, I don't know how to say it.
Yeah, wacky name probably. Anyone else? Well, thanks for coming. I hope you learned something.